Probably give folks a little more time to get into the room. My name is Jason Hamrick, and I'm a senior content strategist at Phase 2. We're a digital engagement agency based here in Arlington, Virginia, and our mission is to make it so that anyone, anywhere can connect with some of the world's most impactful organizations online. What I want to talk to you about today is about the intersection of content strategy and analytics. A lot of you have probably seen this. It's the brain traffic quad, the content strategy quad created by Christina Halvorson. It's a way to think about content strategy as content design and systems design. And usually when people think about content design and content strategy, they really focus on this editorial part of the conversation. Editorial content strategy that answers questions like, what's our mission? Who are our audiences? What's our point of view, our voice and tone, and what kind of brand and language standards do we need to comply with? There's this other part of the content strategy quad that doesn't get a lot of love. It's the process and systems design part of content strategy. Really talks about governance and tries to answer questions like, how do I move content through a life cycle from idea through creation and into maintenance? What tools do we need to use to actually do that? How and when do we care for existing content? Content strategy is not all about creating new things. In many cases, it's about maintaining, nurturing, and building on what you have. Who gets to say no is an important part of this. In every organization, there's that one stakeholder who can put the kibosh on everything. Who gets to say no? And understanding that, having a clear view of who that is really important to understanding your overall strategy. And of course, what standards and metrics do we want to use to measure our content quality performance? Another way to ask this question is to ask the question, is my content strategy actually working? So today, I want to dig into an answer to that question. It's called the digital measurement model. I wish I could take credit for inventing it, but it's actually created by a man named Avinash Kaushik, who works for Google. He was Google's analytics evangelist, and now he runs an agency called Market Motive and the blog Occam's Razor. And it's a pretty simple model, but its idea is you start with your big objective. You think about your engagement strategies, your KPIs, what your targets want to be, how you segment your audiences, and then use all that information to refine your strategy. Let me dig into each of those a little bit more. I'll show you this strategy in a little more detail, this way of thinking, and I'll walk through 3 examples that might be useful for folks, especially here at the institutes. So when we think about functional objective, that's really what we're trying to achieve for the organization inside of a single area. It's really easy to think about and talk about the big goals. You know, we want to cure a disease. If you're a business, we want to change the share price from $5 a share to $5.50 a share. Those are huge, lofty goals. And if you're a director of communications, or if you're someone who's actually in charge of implementing an engagement strategy, it's hard to wrap your head around that big goal. At the same time, folks sometimes go the other direction, and they think about their objective is to get page views. We need to get 1 million page views, and get that number from 1 million to 1.5. But if it's 1 million page views on your Contact Us page, are you really serving your audiences? The functional objective, thinking about this inside of a single area. So you might say, for HR, what are their goals? How do they contribute to the success of the organization? Not just digitally, but in the world. So for HR, it might be something like attracting the best candidates. If you are a director of communications, then your goals are about outreach and about understanding and about building community. So when we're thinking about how do we set our goals, it's that middle layer. Department by department, area by area. Once we understand those things, we can then figure out specific strategies that we can use online to move that objective forward, to move that big organizational goal forward. Right? This is where the big organizational goal starts to take shape in an online content strategy. For each of those strategies, we can then think about a KPI. KPI is, of course, a number that helps us understand how we are doing against that objective. And it's really important that that's a number, right? It's not just increasing or decreasing, but here's a target we want to hit. Here's something we can actually measure. We want to try to uncover a baseline, a benchmark, and then set a realistic target for that KPI. If you figure out that your KPI is downloads, and right now you have 5 a month, setting a target of 5,000 a month isn't a realistic target, and there's no obvious and incremental path to get there. And finally, we think about audience segments, which is the group of people or specific behaviors that can move that number. So looking at data in aggregate is really difficult. But if you take that and slice it into behaviors, things you can track, things you can change, personas, different kinds of audiences and users that you can target and think about and interact with, that's really where segmentation comes in. Let me show you a few examples that might be useful here for folks who are from the institutes. So a big goal of serving patients and caregivers. So an objective may be getting patients and caregivers the right information and the right resources to them in a way that they can understand. It's a big goal, and there are lots of ways to do that. Online, we might have an engagement strategy, digital strategy that says we want to create engaging content, a wide variety of content types that demonstrate the Institute's knowledge. How do we track that? We track that maybe by looking at the percentage of multi-page view sessions within your health information site. So not just the entire site, not just multi-page view sessions inside the entire site, but within an individual part of the site, how are people engaging there? This is really about getting folks to engage with that content, if that is your objective. And how do we segment that? We segment that, maybe we segment that by a patient persona and a caregiver persona, and try and understand how each of those different types of people are viewing those pages. A second example, we are a funding resource for researchers. So if you're in grants and funding, if you're an EP, then your objective is to be the nation's leading funder for this basic and translational research for scientists and laboratories. Right? What's an engagement strategy for that? There are several, but one of them might be to provide researchers with really comprehensive information about available funding opportunities. How do you measure that? Maybe by the number of clicks to grants.gov, from your site to grants.gov. That might be a way to measure your effectiveness, is by seeing how many people leave your site and go to a specific place. How do you segment that big number? One way might be between the lag between the day that you first post the FOA and when you start to first get clicks off to grants.gov. So this group of people click on the first day, this type of people click on the second day. Most people wait until the third or fourth or fifth day. That might give us an understanding of how that engagement strategy is working. You see, the big idea here is that we're not just gathering metrics for the sake of gathering metrics. We're not just gathering KPIs for the sake of gathering KPIs. We're not just looking at page views and downloads for the sake of those numbers. We're laddering up to a strategy that we're trying to test, which ladders up to an organizational objective, something that really moves the business forward. It's something that matters. One more example. Again, one big goal, one big functional objective inside an institute might be to rally a community of support for patients and caregivers through community outreach. There are lots of ways we can do that again. But online, one thing we can do, we can provide maybe a community engagement toolkit for download. And so we want to track percentage of visitors who actually download that toolkit within any period of time. Again, really specific number tied to a really specific strategy that rolls up to an overall organizational goal. And we can segment that maybe by the number of interactions before download. So people look at 5 pages and then they download, versus 5% of people look at one page and then directly download. If you segment that data, really get into it, you get a better sense of how well that individual strategy is working. As we're thinking about different kinds of KPIs, we want to look at different measurement lenses, basically things that take place throughout the engagement lifecycle, the engagement funnel, thinking about marketing reach. So that might be page views from different channels, where people are coming in from Facebook or email, how much social applause you're getting, versus content engagement. So marketing reach is about getting people into your experience. Content engagement is about how they are actually engaging with the content on the site. And then, of course, visitor conversion is trying to understand, are they taking the positive actions that you want them to take? That's all well and good theoretically, but how do you actually go about creating this model? To create a functional objective, to understand what those are, sit down with your senior leadership and discuss long-term goals. You can probably look at strategic plans and your 2020 roadmap, but really sitting down and discussing long-term goals beyond the next funding cycle. But what do you want to do over the next 2, 3, 5 years? Figuring out those engagement strategies is really about understanding your audiences. Who are they? What are they trying to accomplish? What devices are they using? What language are they most comfortable with? Do they need a special language access plan to help them understand content? Engagement strategies really hinge on understanding audiences. For KPIs, I talked about baselines, benchmarks, and targets. For baseline, that's just the current value of that metric. In some cases, you'll be able to get that from your analytics. In some cases, it'll be a brand new KPI, and you won't have a baseline for what that current value is. For a benchmark, look to the industry, look to peers, look to comparators to see what's actually happening out there in the world. Is 1 million page views on our homepage per month good or bad? What's the benchmark inside the institute? What's the benchmark inside the government? There are lots of good places to get that information. Analytics.gov, of course, being my favorite. But there are also conversations that happen, monthly meetings, where you can actually share information with one another and understand what those benchmarks should be. Of course, when you're setting the target, making sure that's a realistic goal, something you can approach via incremental improvements, things you can monitor and track. And for audience segments, it's important to understand those audiences again. Who are they? What specific groups of people are important? What visitor behavior is something that's desirable, something you want to encourage? This one is really difficult to get at sometimes because, especially in the public sector, there's this idea that who are audiences? Audiences are everyone. Everyone in the country is a potential audience member. Ask the hard question. Are they really? Is everyone, every single person, a potential audience member? Having that conversation is really important to figuring out your strategy. In short, there's no alternative to an honest conversation with your senior leadership, with the folks who are writing your content day in and day out, with the folks who are maintaining it, with contract writers, with content developers. There's really no alternative, no substitute to just sitting down and doing the research and thinking and talking. You might learn this leads to some difficult conversations. You'll pull out your baselines or your current numbers and they're lower than you want them to be. Or you'll realize that senior leadership person doesn't have a clear vision or specifically inside their department, inside their area, what they're trying to accomplish and how they're going to get there. But really, there's no alternative to just sitting down and talking to people. So there is a reason why in user experience we do lots of personal interviews, one-on-one interviews. You just got to sit down and talk to people and really understand what they want to do. So you've done all the hard work, you've had the honest conversations, and now it's time to get into reporting. How do you actually create reports that are meaningful? We all know how this goes, right? So your vendor, your contractor, someone once a month sends you a 60-page PDF that has lots of charts and graphs in it and dense paragraphs. You flip through it for 5 minutes. Maybe it's a single agenda bullet on the monthly meeting. You look at it, you stick it in the drawer, never think about it again. That's not particularly useful, obviously. So there are different ways we can report and better ways to report. First, think about creating focused real-time dashboards for different leadership needs. If you're an analytics person, your director of communication needs to understand a different set of metrics than the person who's in charge of outreach. That person needs to understand something different than the person who runs grants and funding. That person needs to understand something different than the senior leadership. Having conversations with those people as well. What do you need to understand to help maintain the organization? What do you need to know about how your digital investment is going? Creating focused dashboards for different leadership needs and giving them access to it. What we've seen again and again is that one of the perceived values of that PDF is you get to be the information gatekeeper. I get the report, I pull out the pieces I think you need to see, I remove all the bad news, and I tell you the rosy picture of how well your .gov is going. Creating dashboards breaks through that noise and again leads to a little bit more clarity about what's actually happening inside the organization. As far as cadence goes, sometimes monthly is going to make sense for KPIs, sometimes weekly. Quarterly reporting on content reach and engagement might be something you want to think about. Do things really change month by month? Really, unless you're in the middle of a campaign. What you'll likely see is that content reach and engagement, quarterly is enough. Report on metrics in those key audience segments, not in aggregate. We had 1 million page views to the homepage. Okay, who was that? I don't know. It's much more powerful to say, had 1 million page views, 35% of those came in via a mobile device, 15% of those were primarily Spanish speaking, et cetera, et cetera. Really break down and understand who your audiences are and how they're coming. It'll give you some insight into your content strategy. It'll give you insight into some of those questions we talked about at the beginning around audiences, goals, tone, how you engage, what the content structure should be. And always provide the context and relate that metric back up to the big goal, right? The reason we're measuring PDF downloads is because we believe that's a good measure of community engagement. Get away from the PDF and, as I said, move to real-time dashboards. This is an example, part of an example of a dashboard that Phase 2 built for one of our clients. You'll see that it's got some of the standard traditional metrics in it, exits, page view directions, pages per session. But then for them, multiple page view visits compared against the previous month is really important. Really important for them to understand that single metric as it relates to the others. And of course, the right column here is something that they can manage and change the report on in real time. So they can select different time frames. They can default channel grouping is where people are coming in from. Are they coming in from Facebook? Are they coming in directly? Which device are they using? Which country they're visiting? And in the rest of this report, there are lots of other different drop-downs and checkboxes that people can use in real time to change the outcome of this report, the output of this report. But getting away from those PDFs that get stuck into a drawer and moving to something like a real-time dashboard is definitely worth the investment. I want to shift gears for a second and talk about the role of visitor sentiment. So one of the possible downsides of this approach, this really metric-focused approach, the single metric-focused approach, is that it's micro-focused. You lose the macro view. You might lose the big view of what's happening, how your visitors are actually feeling, which is where visitor sentiment comes in. All right, so it can Understanding visitor sentiment can serve as a counterbalance to a really KPI-focused and numbers-driven approach to understanding your content strategy and the power of it. So when I say visitor sentiment, I mean customer service surveys gathered through things like 4C. I'm thinking about the verbatims that are captured from there, your Net Promoter Score, your NPS, for example. Those can show you the macro view of how well your overall strategy, your overall engagement is going. And they serve as a really useful counterbalance to this micro KPI-driven view. It also helps prevent the metric from becoming the target. So you guys have probably heard about Wells Fargo and all the trouble they got in a year and a half ago or so, where they had, their customer service people had targets for how many new accounts they had to open. And originally I just started out with a metric. Let's just measure month by month how many new accounts our folks are opening. Eventually that turned into a place where that metric became the target. And so the customer service people were just opening fake accounts just to hit the number. And because they were only measuring that little number outside of context, it was able to go on for a year and a half. Understanding visitor sentiment, thinking about that, getting that macro view can serve as a good counterbalance to what might feel like a very KPI, numbers-driven, truly analytical approach to understanding your content strategy. Why is all of this important? It helps us get back to that question we started with, right? Is my content strategy working? Which is what we all wanted to come to understand today. And there is this true relationship between your content strategy and your analytics strategy. Content strategy drives changes in what you're actually capturing, the KPIs you're measuring. The KPIs then give you some insight into how your content strategy, your engagement strategies might want to change. It's a virtuous circle if you let it be. And it helps you answer really specific and valuable questions from senior leadership, like, are our marketing efforts drawing people into us? We can see that by looking at our marketing reach numbers. Is your investment in digital content development actually paying off in increased engagement? Are these efforts leading to better conversion and more engaged audiences? Right? Understanding those things, tracking those things, looking at those KPIs and saying, okay, this one's moving in the wrong direction. Maybe our strategy is wrong and we need to shift it. How do we actually go about shifting that strategy? Right? It's one thing to know we need to change, but how do you actually go about doing it? Every engagement strategy is a hypothesis. We think that creating a community toolkit in a PDF is going to lead to better engagement. We think that that's what people want. Testing those hypotheses with A/B testing. That is one way to shift that strategy. We can watch that KPI change and then see that gives us a sense of if our strategy is actually working. If possible, we can implement personalization strategy inside those audience segments to get beyond those smaller aggregations of audience segments and approach something closer to true personalization. Then always be thinking about how to roll what you're seeing in those analytics reports, roll those back into your content strategy and your editorial mission. Most institutes keep an editorial calendar that looks month by month, out to 6-12 months out. Watching these KPIs, watching these metrics, understanding how they roll up to those big goals gives you an insight and a way to think about if you should change that editorial calendar. Are you really meeting your mission? Is your content strategy really performing? But it all starts with this. Pretty simply, it starts with focusing on the impact you want to have for your organization first, and then building strategies from there, building KPIs to measure those strategies, rather than starting with a KPI and working backwards. Thank you. Does anyone have questions? What questions do you have? We have a little time. Yes, sir.
Sorry, you mentioned at one point what happens if the leadership doesn't have, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what happens if the leadership doesn't have an idea of their strategy? Have you had a case where you've like kind of shown them the analytics of what people are looking for and it's helped them shape them? And if so, do you have an example of such a thing, or is that just one of those kind of, you guys need to go figure this out before we can do anything? I mean,
Yeah. So the question was, what happens if you talk to your leadership about their strategy and they don't have a strategy? Yeah. So that has happened. And as you said, this is a place where this can actually go the other way. You can show them the metrics because you're in there day by day. You understand how your call center is looking at with your publishing partner, how that's intersecting with the conference schedule. That puts you in a position of power to say, look, if you don't have a strategy, based on what I'm seeing, and based on what I can just intuit the goals are from understanding our strategic plan, here's what I think we should be doing over the course of the next 6 months, over the course of the next 12 months, year, etc. Breaking out of that funding cycle is really important because it's really easy to get short-sighted. And, well, October's coming up, so we got to get this stuff done. I have had examples where that's happened. Sometimes at a macro level, they don't have a strategy at all. Sometimes that they think that it's working, or they have a pet project like daily email that they think is really popular, but then they just love writing it, but it turns into a vanity project for leadership. And that's one of the parts of the hard conversation is, we are spending 100 hours a month creating emails that no one is opening and no one is reading. Can I take 75 hours of that 100 hours and go create infographics or go create explainer videos or go do something else? That's a really great question. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Have you ever had a situation where you have to show like the ROI, but in specifically financial terms? So these are the analytics, we have a strategy, here's what the analytics are, and as a result of that strategy, these analytics have changed, and this is what it actually means money-wise, implications.
So the question, for those of you who didn't hear it, have I had occasion to actually tie these analytics back to ROI, back to actually like real money? Yes. And Google Analytics and lots of other analytics platforms have easy ways to track those conversions, track goals, and tie them back to sales and transactions. I recently had exactly that. What you're saying happen is we had a strategy for a conversion funnel, basically a sales funnel. People come in to buy a course, and we could see page by page where people were dropping out of the funnel, and I could say, your current time to finish this process is 9.5 minutes. Speaking of A/B testing, here, and that is that 9.5 minute version of your funnel that is 23 pages long is generating $1 million a month, $2 million a month. We hypothesized that if we can change this page here, change this page here, get rid of this entirely, and move this to the front, we can shrink that funnel and change that time from 9 minutes to 3 minutes. We built that, we tested it with user testing, and actually saw both of those things. Saw the time inside the funnel decrease to about 4 minutes, which is still a pretty long time, but better than 9. And saw that that monthly revenue go up as well. Again, this is the part where you have to really take the time to understand what those big business goals are. Any more questions? All right. Then, thank you very much. If you find you have questions, you want more information, you can reach me at phase2technology.com, and I'll be at the Phase 2 booth for the next little bit if you want to have a deeper conversation. Thank you very much. Have a great day.